Many European cultures have tales of cities destroyed by floods, each warning future generations about greed, gluttony, or heresy. Yet few stories are as chilling as the tale of a city often called the Atlantis of the North. Located in what is now the Netherlands, Germany, or Wales, depending on the version, this city was so corrupt, filled with greed, lust, and cruelty that it ignored all warnings. Priests were mocked, the poor were enslaved, and one night the ground trembled and water poured in from all sides. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is part 2 of our series on the mysterious drowned cities beneath our feet. Let's start with how they fell. In medieval folklore, there are 2 types of floods, those that come slowly and those that arrive suddenly. We've seen the slow drowning in part 1 of this series, when entire regions sank over decades due to rising sea levels, leaving behind ghost towns on purpose-built islands. But for our drowned cities, the water arrives in a flash. Imagine it's nighttime. A small fishing village sits on the edge of a windswept coast. For weeks, a storm has been brewing out at sea. Now waves crash against the shore, threatening to spill inland. People hurry home as the sky cracks open and the wind screams through the crooked streets. But it's too late. Within minutes, the sea has risen and spilled into the low-lying lands. Homes are swept away and villages flee to higher ground. But the water follows them. This isn't a normal flood. It rises faster than any tide, swallowing everything in its path. When it finally subsides, days later, nothing is left but a churning sea and the wreckage of lives once lived. In fact, the storm flood killed more than 1,000 people in Great Britain in 1287, while the 1362 Grote-Mandrenka storm flood inundated large parts of northern Europe. At the time, there was no explanation for such catastrophes, so people looked to the heavens for an answer. They saw the hand of God. According to legend, a massive tidal wave or sudden flood struck without mercy. Church bells rang out in panic, but the water silenced them forever. Entire buildings were swallowed. Streets turned into rivers, and the next morning nothing remained but a silent, endless lake. Some versions say you can still hear the church bells ringing beneath the surface every full moon. To be clear, nobody alive today remembers the exact circumstances of the legendary drowning. After all, stories don't survive if everyone telling them is dead. Over the centuries, memories faded and the details changed. Still, a very real possibility exists that what we think are myths may have some basis in reality. Consider this. Between 1000 and 1700, an estimated 138 extreme floods struck the Netherlands alone. So it's likely that somewhere among these tragedies, a few became particularly notorious, even shaping the cultural landscape. After all, this isn't just fairy tale. Real places like Rungholt, a trading city in northern Germany, were destroyed by the Grote-Mandrenka storm flood in 1362. According to a report published in 1364, contemporary historians called it the Atlantis of the North Sea, explaining that the only remnants of the disaster were the presence of corpses floating in the water and the ringing of distant church bells. That same year, the English chronicler Jean Foucault included a discussion of the flood in his book, The Chronicle of England, which gives additional context to the tragedy. It seems that the flooding occurred shortly after Easter. Fortunately, he wrote, the inundation happened on Easter Monday, so that not many people were outside. And then the tide withdrew to the sea again after a few days. However, the land could not bear up under such a great weight of mud and slime, which had lain so long upon it. So in the end, far more people died than would otherwise have perished. Ultimately, the death toll likely exceeded 10,000 people, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. All that remains are underwater ruins and old maps. Over in Wales, the legend of Cantre and Gwaelod tells of a similar demise. According to the tale, this once great city sat beneath Cardiff Bay, but because its gatekeeper failed to close the gates against the incoming flood, the city was banished beneath the waves as punishment. Today, locals claim you can still see the tops of houses peeking above the surface during low tide. Then in Italy, the submerged bell tower of Lago di Resia is all that remains of a village buried in 1950 to make way for a dam. Locals claim the town was cursed, and the legend only grew when a second tower was discovered nearby. Turns out both towers were once part of a watchtower complex used during World War I. But that didn't stop legends from forming. That said, not all scholars agree. Was this divine punishment or just nature at its most ruthless? Well, given that hundreds of coastal communities were wiped off the map in the last millennium alone, you decide. We should also point out that many of these stories have striking similarities. Whether in Wales, Germany, or France, the doomed city always engages in debauchery and immorality, frequently with a heavy emphasis on clerical corruption. Usually a warning is issued, usually ignored, and the city is eventually wiped away by a sudden flood. Not only does this suggest that these stories were repeated over the years, it also shows how important these stories were to the people who told them. After all, medieval Europeans had no scientific explanation for sudden devastating floods. These events were catastrophic, unpredictable, inescapable, faced with such overwhelming force. The human mind craves answers. Was there any way to predict such a disaster? Could its effects be mitigated? And most important, could it be avoided? Many believe the key to avoiding a deluge lay in avoiding God's wrath. Avoiding sin was easier said than done, however, and required constant vigilance. Imagine a life when a single misstep could endanger your soul. Imagine a world where an angry God could take everything away in an instant. Such stories served as a reminder, a cautionary tale intended to scare people away from a life of sin and toward one of piety and devotion. By highlighting the consequences of immoral behavior, these narratives aim to guide individuals towards making righteous choices. Furthermore, these stories also offer a means of assigning blame when faced with a natural disaster. The tendency to search for someone or something to blame. After all, why would an all-powerful, all-knowing God allow such suffering? Moreover, who was responsible for the calamity? Human actions or divine will? By depicting corrupt priests, tyrannical rulers, and disobedient citizens, these stories provided a tangible focus for people's frustrations and fears. In times of immense suffering, these narratives served as a way to externalize the pain, directing anger towards identifiable figures or groups rather than towards distant, abstract beings. What's more, these stories allowed believers to find meaning in the chaotic world. Natural disasters can seem random, senseless, and terrifying. How could this have happened to me? What did I do to deserve this? These questions reflect the human struggle to comprehend and cope with the face of suffering. In times of crisis, people crave understanding and meaning. These stories provided a narrative framework that made sense of the disaster and placed it within a larger moral order. The belief that one's actions and consequences beyond this life offered solace and a sense of control in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. And while we now know these stories aren't literally true, their importance to medieval society shouldn't be understated. As historian Jeffrey Burton Russell explains, such stories were so common that they took on a life of their own. They circulated in written and oral form, spread by bards, monks, and wandering storytellers. Their popularity led to artistic adaptations as well. Religious plays and mystery cycles often incorporated these narratives, turning them into dramatic spectacles performed during festivals or church services. These theatrical renditions would have brought the stories to life for a while, reinforcing their presence in popular culture, and churches themselves frequently served as visual reminders. Stained glass windows, wall paintings, and sculptures often depicted scenes from these narratives, ensuring that the messages embedded within them were constantly before the eyes of worshippers. These artistic representations not only reinforced the moral lessons of the stories, but also made them more accessible to a largely literate population. It wasn't until the Age of Enlightenment that these traditional beliefs began to fade away. As science and reason took center stage, the supernatural explanations of historical events were increasingly seen as unscientific and irrational. So the Atlantis of the North and other drowned cities passed into legend, but perhaps their greatest legacy lies in the power of storytelling itself. When thinking of these vanished cities, we are tempted to dismiss them as myths or misfortunes, but their stories prove the enduring power of the human imagination in the face of the unknown. When faced with catastrophic events, people didn't just seek to understand the physical disaster, but also its meaning, its cause, and its implications for their souls. Now, it's time to hear from you. What do you think caused this mysterious flood? Were they divine punishments, natural disasters, or simply Share your thoughts below. And if this video made you think of any other myths or legends, feel free to mention them. Lastly, don't forget to like and share. Thanks for watching.